A little over 3 years ago, we profiled the case of Cynthia Miller, a young schoolteacher who was brutally murdered the night before her wedding in 1981. At the time of our original feature, the Beckley Police Department had just launched a new and reinvigorated investigation into Miller's murder. On October 13, 2020, Beckley, and indeed most of West Virginia, were taken aback to learn of a dramatic new development in this 39-year-old case. An indictment for first-degree murder has been returned in the case of Cynthia Jane Miller. Earl James Robbins, 64 years of age and whose current residence is Valley State Prison in California, was indicted by a Raleigh County grand jury on one count of first-degree murder. In a somewhat surprising twist, Robbins was also indicted by the same grand jury for kidnapping and sexual assault of a child, crimes which date to 1980. As grand jury testimony is kept secret until the trial, there is only so much new information we can report at this juncture. Therefore, this seems an appropriate time to take a second look at the murder of Cynthia Miller. At the time of our original feature, the investigation into Cynthia Miller's murder was once again in the headlines. While the case was never officially closed, 36 years of dead ends had left it about as cold as a cold case can get. Early in 2017, however, new information, the precise nature of which is still unknown, led the Beckley Police Department and Sergeant Morgan Bragg to move the case of Miller's murder from the back to the front burner. With the investigation reinvigorated and hopes for a resolution renewed, the story of Cynthia Miller's tragic and brutal murder once again became the topic of speculative conversations and tearful memories. Miller's 1981 murder shocked and appalled the small Appalachian community. Those old enough to do so recalled the tragic events of 36 years previous. Those too young to remember would soon learn. They would learn about Cynthia Miller's life, her career as a schoolteacher, her engagement to a local police officer, and they would learn about that night in August of 1981, when Miller's seemingly storybook life was cut short in cold blood. Cynthia Jane Miller was born in Beckley, West Virginia on August 2, 1954. She grew up with the reputation of someone who made good grades, enjoyed playing the piano, sewing, and made friends easily. After graduating from Woodrow Wilson High School in 1972, Miller went on to earn a master's degree in math from Concord College. Miller divorced from her first husband, Michael Cole, in 1979. As a deeply religious person, this was far from an easy thing for Miller to do, though she pressed on. In 1981, Miller was preparing to start teaching math at Park Junior High School in Beckley, West Virginia. Sometime in mid-August, she and her new boyfriend, Gary O'Neill, decided the time was right for them to wed. At the time, O'Neill was a police officer in the nearby community of Leicester. The couple applied for a marriage certificate on August 24th, and the future looked bright for Miller and her soon-to-be groom. No one could have ever imagined the storm clouds which were about to gather. August 26, 1981, was a whirlwind of activity for both Miller and O'Neill. With schools set to commence in just 4 days, Miller spent the first half of the day decorating her classroom at Park Junior High. Fellow teacher Norma Saul assisted her. According to published accounts, Miller left Park Junior High School at noon for a doctor's appointment and then returned to her apartment at 103.5 Miller Street on Beckley's east side. Miller remained at her home until approximately 4 p.m. At that time, she decided to visit her father at the Montgomery wards in Beckley. Miller and her father reportedly talked for about 1 hour before she again returned to her home. A short time later, Miller's father came by her house to make some minor repairs to a garage door. He is said to have remained at his daughter's home until approximately 6:30 p.m. At 7 p.m., Gary O'Neill arrived and visited with Miller while she worked on preparing her Avon orders. Excited about their wedding the following day, O'Neill decided to visit his parents in Princeton, West Virginia, approximately 40 minutes away. O'Neill left Miller's home at 8:20 p.m., telling his soon-to-be bride that he would likely return around 11:30. Cynthia Miller continued to work on her Avon orders. Miller's home was a duplex unit. She occupied the upper or ground-level floor. The downstairs tenant, Terry Boland, is reported to have returned to the residence at around 8:30 p.m. Boland had difficulty unlocking the door to the downstairs apartment and asked Miller for help. Boland later described Miller's mood as jovial. Cynthia Miller assisted Boland with the jammed door and then went back upstairs. Boland later recalled that she laid down for bed at approximately 9 p.m. She remembered hearing Miller come down the steps to their joint laundry room and then return to the upstairs area. Boland soon fell asleep and did not recall hearing or seeing Miller again. After returning from the laundry room, Cynthia Miller called her regional Avon manager to review the orders she had been working on. According to Miller's manager, the two of them talked on the phone for about 20 minutes. The time at the conclusion of their telephone call would have been approximately 9:20 p.m. 10 minutes later, at around 9:30 p.m., Gary O'Neill attempted to call Miller's home but received no answer. Uneasy at not being able to reach his fiancé, O'Neill left his parents' home in Princeton at around 11:30 p.m., his apprehension slowly starting to get the better of him. Around the same time, Terry Boland was awakened by a call from her father, who was experiencing car trouble. Boland got up and left the apartment a few minutes later to give her father a ride home. She did not notice anything out of the ordinary. Gary O'Neill arrived back at Miller's apartment at around 12:40 a.m. The date was now August 27th. Curiously, O'Neill noted the front porch light was not turned on, as was usually the case when Miller was expecting him. O'Neill managed to unlock the front door and was met with a horrendous sight. Lying on the floor, about 2 feet directly in front of him, was the lifeless body of Cynthia Miller, the back of her head soaking in blood. O'Neill was virtually stunned. More out of instinct than rationale, he managed to get to the phone and call 911. A battalion of emergency vehicles soon surrounded the small home. Attempts at resuscitation were in vain, and Cynthia Miller was declared dead at the scene. Her death had been particularly brutal. She had been shot 4 times in the head with a .25 caliber pistol. 2 of the shots were fired from close range. The other 2 were fired from a gun that was against her head. Publicly, the scene was described as somewhat Spartan. Aside from Miller's body, some clothing, the ballistics and blood splatter, the house was reported to have yielded precious little in the way of evidence. Privately, authorities were able to recover evidence from the crime scene which would later prove crucial. The existence of this evidence was reported to Mysterious WV in 2017 in order to help frame the narrative of our original feature. At the time, it was agreed that the nature of this undisclosed evidence would be withheld so as to not compromise the ongoing investigation. Mysterious WV will continue to honor this verbal agreement, going only so far as to say that the evidence was found at the crime scene. Miller's own .25 caliber automatic pistol was found in her residence and quickly ruled out as having fired the fatal shots. The house and the surrounding neighborhood were thoroughly searched. However, the murder weapon was never found. Early on, authorities surmised that Miller's killer was either known to her or was someone who was very unthreatening in nature. There were no signs of a forced entry outside and no signs of a struggle inside. Nothing had been taken from the home, and Miller's body showed no signs of trauma or sexual assault, indicating that her death was probably not a crime of opportunity, but rather personal in nature. The number of gunshot wounds, 4 to the face and head, was viewed as overkill, strongly suggesting a crime of passion or extreme anger. Later on August 27th, Terry Boland advised authorities that she returned to the neighborhood at around 1 a.m., but decided against trying to go home once she learned what had happened. The following day, Terry Boland moved out of the apartment. Many have questioned how Boland could have failed to be awakened by the sound of 4 gunshots and yet roused from her sleep by a telephone call. This suspicion has been commented on by many viewers of our original feature. The Beckley Police Department had previously stressed to Mysterious WV that Boland was not at any time considered a suspect in Miller's murder. Constrained by investigative protocol, they were only able to elaborate by stating that an alibi confirmed by her father, as well as the restricted evidence found at the scene, all but ruled her out entirely. Both the Raleigh County Coroner and the West Virginia State Medical Examiner concurred that Miller was shot at approximately 9:30 p.m. and likely expired within 30 minutes. Following the discovery of Miller's body, police fanned out around the neighborhood but were unable to locate an eyewitness. One of Miller's neighbors, Barry Webb, did report having heard what he thought were 4 firecrackers around the time the murder is thought to have taken place. Webb, who lived directly across the street from Miller's apartment, stated that he looked out to investigate the source of the noise but saw nothing to indicate trouble. The time period was late summer, so the sun would have set less than 30 minutes before the fatal shots are believed to have been fired. According to Webb, he heard a total of 4 shots, 3 of which were loud and 1 which sounded muffled. Cynthia Jane Miller was laid to rest in the Blue Ridge Memorial Gardens on Monday, August 30th, 1981. The same day the new school year would start in Raleigh County. The investigation into Cynthia Miller's murder dragged on. As the months slowly turned into years, the case gradually went cold. Complicating the investigation was the fact that authorities were not even certain that Cynthia Miller was the object of the killer's rage. Some, including former Captain Jeffrey Shoemate, believed it was possible that Miller's fiancé, Gary O'Neill, may have been the intended victim. At the time, O'Neill was a police officer in the nearby community of Leicester, and it was theorized that someone with a vendetta against him may have instead taken it out on Miller. From the outset, police stated that they had 2 suspects in mind, neither of whom were ever named publicly. One was said to have been an acquaintance of Miller's, the other an acquaintance of Gary O'Neill. Even today, it is yet to be confirmed or denied if Earl Robbins was one of these suspects, although Sergeant Bragg did go so far as to state that Robbins was known and questioned in 1981. The reason for his questioning has yet to be made public. 36 years would pass before the investigation into Miller's murder would receive a real shot in the arm. On April 25th of 2017, Crime Stoppers of West Virginia announced that they were forming a new multi-agency cold case task force and that Miller's murder was at the top of their list. A reward of $10,000 for information leading to an arrest and conviction was offered. This renewed effort quickly bore fruit. On May 8th, the Beckley Police Department publicly announced that they had received significant new information concerning Miller's murder. Sergeant Morgan Bragg stated that the information they received at the time reinforced an earlier theory that there may have been some relationship between Miller and her assailant. In what was later described as a geographically strategic move, Crime Stoppers erected a large billboard along a major thoroughfare near Miller's former residence. Authorities later confirmed to Mysterious WV that the billboard had been deliberately placed and was aimed at a person or persons who also have yet to be publicly identified. A little over 3 years later, the persistence and determination of the investigating agencies appeared to have paid off. Although the exact course of events has yet to be explained, something drew the attention of the authorities to 64-year-old Earl James Robbins, known locally as Robbie, a former Beckley resident and currently incarcerated in Chowchilla, California. It would perhaps be more accurate to say that the attention of authorities was, for some reason, drawn back to Robbins, as Sergeant Bragg had previously confirmed that Robbins was known to the Beckley Police Department during the original investigation. Curiously, an article which appeared in the Beckley Register-Herald in 2011 indicated that authorities had received, quote, a letter which contained some useful information from an incarcerated man in California, end quote. The letter apparently led them to a witness who provided some insight, but died soon thereafter. Whatever the nature of the new or corroborated evidence, by October 13th of 2020, authorities felt comfortable enough to bring their evidence before a Raleigh County grand jury. That morning, the grand jury returned a true bill against Robbins on one count of first-degree murder in the case of Cynthia Miller. Later that day, the office of the Raleigh County Prosecuting Attorney, Kristen Keller, along with Sergeant Bragg and Lieutenant Tim Bledsoe with the West Virginia State Police, made the announcement that many had waited over 39 years to hear.
The Raleigh County grand jury returned a 5-count indictment against Earl James Robbins. This is a case that has been under investigation by the Beckley Police Department and the West Virginia State Police since 1981.
That night, the news of Robbins' indictment and the break in the decades-old cold case led the news on the television and radio stations in the Beckley area.
For almost 40 years, the murder of Cynthia Miller went unsolved. 50 News reporter Paris Dunford joins us live from the newsroom now with an update. Paris.
Riley, a man was finally indicted for the murder of Cynthia Miller, a huge win for the police departments that investigated this case and for anyone who knew Miller.
This evening, it's a cold case finally resulting in an indictment after almost 40 years. A Raleigh County school teacher was shot to death in her home in August of 1981 on her wedding day. And now a 64-year-old man who is already doing time in California has been indicted.
Earl James Robbins has been indicted for the murder of Cynthia Miller, a case that's remained unsolved since 1981. But in this long investigation, State Police and Beckley PD were also able to charge him with another Raleigh County case, the 1980 kidnapping, abduction, and first-degree sexual assault of a minor. Robbins lived in southern West Virginia for a period of time, but now is in California in prison for other violent crimes.
The indictment of a suspect in Cynthia Miller's murder was exciting enough for the community. However, the news that the investigation into her murder had also led to a break in an even older case lent an aura of surrealism to the already pregnant atmosphere. Not only was there now a chance that a well-known 39-year-old homicide could be resolved, but the possibility that other unsolved or unreported crimes from the same period may also have light shone upon them has given authorities reason to hope for additional breaks in other cases. If he was indeed guilty of the charges brought against him, is it possible that Robbins could have been a serial offender? Could there perchance be others in Beckley or the surrounding area who may have fallen victim to Robbins and remained silent? At the moment, this is little more than educated conjecture. However, Sergeant Bragg has stated to Mysterious WV that the possibility of Robbins having committed offenses against other individuals is being explored. Most recently, during a virtual hearing on November 12th, Robbins pleaded not guilty to 5 counts brought against him: first-degree murder, illegal use of a firearm, abduction, kidnapping, and first-degree sexual assault. Prosecutors in Raleigh County are now set to begin the process to extradite Robbins back to West Virginia, where he will stand trial. No time frame on this process has been announced, and the nature of the grand jury testimony has required authorities to thus far remain mostly mum on the details of their case. In spite of the headlines and the renewed interest in Miller's case, which has developed as a result of Robbins' indictment, it is, again, important to remember that Robbins has only been indicted and not yet convicted of any of the current charges against him. Eventually, he will have his day in court. Until then, he must, by the very nature of the justice system, be considered innocent until a jury of his peers decides otherwise. As of now, there is little to be done other than wait for Earl Robbins' extradition and trial, a process which could take as long as a year or more. In the meantime, Sergeant Morgan Bragg with the Beckley Police Department has asked Mysterious WV to encourage anyone who feels they may have been victimized by Robbins or who may have additional information concerning the murder of Cynthia Miller to come forward. Bragg feels it is possible that there may be other victims who, out of fear or embarrassment, may never have spoken up. If this is the case, then anyone wishing to do so should contact Sergeant Morgan Bragg with the Beckley Police Department. Contact information will be given during the following summation and is provided in the video's description. When she was murdered in 1981, Cynthia Jane Miller lived in this home at 103.5 Miller Street in the eastern section of Beckley. According to Sergeant Morgan Bragg, Earl Robbins was known to have also maintained a residence in this area, though he is also thought to have traveled frequently between Raleigh and Fayette counties. Robbins was born on November 17, 1955. In 1981, he had black hair, brown eyes, was 5 feet 10 inches tall, and was usually referred to as Robbie. In Fayette County, Robbins is reported to have frequented the communities of Oak Hill, Mount Hope, Glen Jean, Whipple, Scarborough, and Sun. Thus far, authorities have been unable to ascertain if Robbins was ever steadily employed while he lived in West Virginia, though it is believed he may have worked in a coal mine at various times. Robbins was last arrested in 2005 in Riverside, California. The website Bail Bonds HQ displays a long list of charges previously brought against Robbins, including rape, sexual battery, and terrorist threats. In 2005, Robbins was convicted of battery after striking his brother-in-law in the back with a hammer, as well as the kidnapping and raping of a woman who was acting as his personal assistant and real estate agent. Robbins was later determined to be incompetent and subsequently committed to the Patton State Hospital. The competency ruling was reversed in March of 2008. Robbins was later sentenced to life with the possibility of parole on the rape and kidnapping charges. Robbins is currently incarcerated at the Valley State Prison in Chowchilla, California, where he is classified as inmate number AB3123. A link to a detailed outline of Robbins' most recent crimes and convictions is provided in this video's description. If you or anyone you know feels they may have been victimized by Earl James Robbins, or if you feel you may be able to contribute any information concerning the 1981 murder of Cynthia Jane Miller, please contact the Beckley, West Virginia Police Department at the phone number or email address listed below.